Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our ERCI Stars webinar dealing with cybersecurity for railway services and procurement. My name is Lutz Hübner, coming from the Cluster Transport, Mobility and Logistics in Berlin and Brandenburg, one of the members of ERCI, the European Railway Clusters Initiative. First, let me say some words about ERCI. The European Railway Clusters Initiative is founded in 2010 and since 2022 a legal entity based in Brussels. It contains 16 railway clusters covering 16 European countries and is covering over 2,000 companies, of which are the majority small and medium-sized enterprises. For sure, we have also good contacts with bigger enterprises, with research institutions, incubators, accelerators, so far. So our services is mainly to support small, medium-sized enterprises on bringing their innovation into the market. And we are also setting some trends. That means some topics that might have good influence or major influence on the future railway system, like cybersecurity, multimodal logistics, green and sustainable mobility, norming and standardization, and human factors. And due to these topics, we have created some task forces where companies and other institutions are working together on an international basis in order to develop new project ideas, for instance, to observe the market and to be more visible on international level. And the topic of visibility is also for sure one of the major tasks of ERCI, and we're supporting, as I said before, for the part of matchmaking and research and development projects in Horizon Europe, for instance, in Europe's Rail, for instance. Another key instrument of gaining visibility or increasing visibility is, for instance, the webinars and workshops we are producing on a regular basis. And one of the webinars is the webinar today. The topic is innovative, it's on cybersecurity. And we have, since 2015, an annual ERCI Innovation Awards. Also this year, the regional contests are going to end. Let's say by the end of May, and then every of these 16 clusters will have the chance to delegate or to nominate at least maximum 3 applications from their clusters to the European contest. And the awarding ceremony will take place this year on the 19th of September in Gdansk at the Traku Rail Fair Show in Poland. Yeah, find some more information on our website, and for sure we are also present on social media. Yeah, some of the ERCI cluster organizations are also working within the STARS project. It is to support European SMEs to successfully adopt advanced technologies to boost their products, services, manufacturing processes, and organization. And we have inside 10 cluster organizations, 5 technology centers, 1 digital innovation hub, 1 blockchain provider as direct partners, and over 30 supporting organizations from 14 European countries. Yeah, and our goal within the STARS project is to give business and technological support to small, medium-sized enterprises due to international strategic alliances, due to hack and match events, and due to B2B matchmaking platform. That means traditional small, medium-sized enterprises should be brought into contact with tech-savvy small, medium-sized enterprises and other technology organizations which have a special idea on how to use advanced technologies for the special use cases which are addressed by the traditional small, medium-sized enterprises. Yeah, the next slide is, I already mentioned it, the STARS Hack and Match events platform. That means there is a possibility that you can find some participants which are already registered in this platform to get in contact with them, to meet them virtually, and to have some dedicated time slots. We created some time slots after our webinar, but normally you have the chance every time to meet the interesting participants. The only thing you have to do is to set up a small profile of you and your company at this STARS Hack and Match events meeting platform. So we come to our first presentation, and I already mentioned, and it's the general topic of our webinar is on cybersecurity. First, I will hand over to my colleague Guido from the Italian railway cluster DTEC Fair.
Thank you, Lutz. Good morning to everybody. It's with great pleasure that I will introduce the first speaker. The first speaker is the e-corridor project, cybersecurity and privacy for multimodal transport. We have here today two speakers, Paolo Monti and Stefano Sebastio. I will just introduce them, saying that Paolo Monti is a senior researcher at the National Council of Research of Italy. His research interest involves trust, security, and privacy in distributed environment, such as cloud and IoT, and distributed ledger technology. In e-corridor, Paolo leads the work package 6, which is related to information sharing and analytics infrastructure. The second speaker of the first speaker means the e-corridor project is Stefano Sebastio. He is a senior R&D manager in cybersecurity at Collins Aerospace Applied Research and Technology in Cork, Ireland, and Collins is one of the partners of the e-corridor. Stefano mainly works on cybersecurity solution for connected system in the commercial aerospace domain. Within e-corridor, Stefano leads the work package 7 on data analytics techniques and support the coordination of the pilot activities in airport train use case. So now, after this presentation, I will pass the floor to Paolo for the first speech on e-corridor. Paolo, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. I'm Paolo Monti from the National Council of the Research of Italy, and the first thing that I need to do is to share my presentation. I hope you see my presentation. No, you are seeing I think the wrong screen. No, okay, you are seeing the right screen, perfect.
Paolo, ti si sente poco, puoi parlare più forte o avvicinarti al microfono, per favore?
Yes, the microphone. Okay.
Thank you.
It is, unfortunately, it is embedded in the PC. So, good morning. I'm Paolo Monti from the National Council of the Research of Italy. I'm going to present the e-corridor project. So, the corridor stands for Edge-Enabled Privacy and the Security Platform for the Multimodal Transport. It is a project funded under the Horizon 2020 program of the European Union, and it was under the call Digital Security. So it is focused on enhancing digital security. In fact, in particular, the corridor aims at providing a flexible, secure, privacy-aware and preserving framework, allowing confidential, distributed and edge-enabled security services. So we provide collaborative services for performing analytics on data provided by the stakeholders of the transport, the multimodal transport system, in order to detect but also prevent the threats that can arise on the system, and also to provide other useful analyses that are relevant for the multimodal transport system. In the project, we have 15 members from 5 countries, so from Italy, Spain, France, Germany, and Ireland. In particular, I'm looking to see. I don't see slide moving. Okay, perfect. Because I have another screen in which I see what you see. You should see the new slide. So the project consortium combines good industry players like HPE, also SNCF or the Airport of Paris, but also several big research institutions like us, CNR, but also Fraunhofer or the University of Paris, SIA, Collins, and like this. The project coordinator is Fabio Martinelli from the National Council of the Research of Italy, and you can see more details on the project on the website of the corridor project. Okay. The scenario in which the corridor project works is the one of the multimodal transport system, in which in the last year we are experiencing an increasing digitalization, both of the processes for managing this system, but also for what concerns the devices, so the vehicles, the cars, the planes, the trains, which are increasingly embedding Internet of Things devices that are able to collect data of various types concerning what is happening on this vehicle. So we are in a situation in which we have a very big quantity of data, both management data but also data from devices that can be used for detecting, for security reasons, and so for detecting attacks that could be happening on the system and better prevent such attack. In fact, also the European Cybersecurity Organization defined a recommendation for the field of the multimodal transport system, in which they advocate the use of information sharing framework like the one that we are proposing with the corridor project, in such a way that we can perform this kind of collaborative analytic and detect and prevent cyber threats that could arise in the system, so increasing the security of the whole system. And then the objective in this scenario, the scenario that I told you before, the objective of the corridor project are the ones of building a flexible, confidential, and privacy-preserving framework in which the data producer can share their data for several purposes, still retaining some degree of control on such data, because this is the only way to encourage, to convince the data producer to share their data with the others, with the competitors. The only way is to ensure them that they can define some security and privacy preferences on this data, and these preferences will be enforced by the framework in such a way that their competitor can see only what they want that such competitor see. And also, the second objective is the one of providing a framework in which data analytics can be executed collaboratively. Collaboratively means that all the data provided by all the stakeholders can be used in such analytics. Obviously, the advantage is big because having a larger database on which we can compute analytics will for sure result in better of earlier results. So the advantage is big. The advantage of sharing data in this collaborative analytics is very big. And then another objective of the project is the one of defining then a secure and robust platform that allows to communicate among the component and the stakeholders of the platform in such a way that the services that are provided by the platform are always available to the participant. Improve, maturate, integrate also the services that already exist in the project partner and that can be integrated in the corridor platform so they can benefit from the advantages of this sharing, of this controlled sharing of data. Provide also mechanisms for seamless access to multimodal transport. And lastly, as all the European projects, we have among the other objectives the exploitation, the communication, standardization, dissemination, and early adoption of our results. And then to achieve this objective, the corridor framework is aimed to exploit at best the power of the information sharing with the edge-based collaborative analytics for cyber protection. So analytics that can be performed not only in data center, but also on the edge, on the smart vehicles, on the smart train, planes, and stuff like this. The key components of our framework are obviously the users. We call them prosumers in the sense that they can both produce and then consume the data. While produce means that the data or their information and management system can be uploaded on the corridor framework. Also, the data coming from their devices or from the IoT embedded on their devices can be uploaded in the corridor framework. And then they act as consumers when they perform the analytics on such data, but not only on their data, but also on the data that are shared by the other producers. Second key component is the information sharing infrastructure, which is the component of our system which allows the data sharing. So it's a component which collects the data from the producer, store this data securely on the storage support, that could be even the cloud, and then pair this data with the privacy preferences expressed by the producer and allow the usage of this data only under the enforcement of these privacy preferences. Instead, the information analysis infrastructure is the infrastructure which allows to embed in the corridor project, in the corridor framework better, a number of analytics procedures which are executed by the framework in a kind of sandbox where this analysis can see only the data that have been properly selected by the information sharing infrastructure. So the consumer asks for a given analysis, the information sharing infrastructure understands which are the data that can be used by that consumer, but for that analysis in that moment under the current situation, let's call it situation now, and prepare a data lake exactly for such composition. Finally, the last component is the advanced security infrastructure, which is the component that exploiting the information sharing infrastructure, the information analysis infrastructure provides further and complex security services to the pilots. Then here we see that the component of the corridor framework are deployed at the security side in a distributed fashion, in the sense that they are deployed in the railway companies, airline company, naval company, car rental company, booking and travel company, passengers, premises, and so it is somehow pervasive. And how I have said before, not only these components are deployed in the offices or in the data center, but also on the IoT devices of this stakeholder, because many data, but also some kind of computation can come from these devices and can be performed on this IoT. This is a global view of the component of the project, in which we can say that on the top we have the information sharing infrastructure, which is devoted to collect this data and to provide this data to the users that want to exploit them in their analytics only under the enforcement of the data sharing agreement. Data sharing agreement are these preferences, these privacy preferences that are expressed with a proper language we defined in the project. And then we have the information analysis infrastructure, which is this component allowing to embed all the analytics we want that are relevant for the pilot that we want to support, and execute it in a security manner, where security means that they are somehow running in a sandbox, and they see only the subset of data that have been prepared by the ISI for that analytic, for that user in that moment. And also we have the advanced security services, that is a component that leveraging on the information sharing infrastructure and information analysis infrastructure provides a number of security services that can be used by the pilot, like continuous behavioral authentication, privacy-aware authorization, privacy-aware seamless multimodal authentication, and secure identity management. And then in the project, we have these three pilots: the car sharing, the information sharing and analytics center, and the airport and train pilots. We take advantage of the components of the framework for the specific task needed in such pilot. Here we have a very quick view of the data sharing agreement, that are these privacy preferences that can be expressed by the producer. We see that the language that we use for expressing it is very similar to the natural language. Also, we have a very user-friendly web interface for expressing these privacy preferences. So this allows the producer to express at best the privacy preference they want to enforce on their data. So what we can take into account, we can take into account authorization or prohibition. That means that depending on which are the attributes of the subject of the data that we want to share, then we can define rules that says whether or not such data can be used for a given analytics operation. So here I simply mentioned the role of the user in a company or the physical position. And for data, I mentioned the type of the number of copies, but this depends on the specific use case, and the corridor project is somehow able to be customized as we want for this. Instead, a good relevant novelty is the enforcement of obligation and data manipulation operation on the data. This means that the data producer can say that the data can be used in analytic, but before being used, some manipulation operation must be performed on the data. Manipulation operation, just to give you a simple example, could be an anonymization. The data producer can say this data can be used for the analytic X only if all the IP addresses that are in this data are anonymized. This is a very simple example to show you this kind of mechanism. So this data sharing agreement allows to the producer to express in a very fine-grained manner the privacy preferences that the user wants that will be enforced on their data when other users would like to use this data in their analytics. And for what concerns the analytics that we have developed now in the project for the multimodal transportation system, here we have some examples: data analytics for driver identification, for itinerary planning, for carbon footprint analysis, and also intrusion detection technology. Instead, the advanced security services that we have developed till now are privacy-aware seamless multimodal authentication, continuous behavioral authentication, privacy-aware interest-based service sharing, privacy-aware authorization, and secure identity management. By the way, as I told you before, exploiting the component of the corridor project that are configurable, we can even define and integrate very easily new data analysis and also new security services. Here we have a view of the architecture of the component of the corridor project. I don't want to go in the very details of this component. I want also only to show three fundamental operations that we have, workflow of the operation that we have in the project, the writing of the privacy preferences by the users, exploiting the user-friendly web interface. These privacy preferences are translated in the enforceable format called the DSA and stored in the DSA store. So the data producer, when want to upload data in the system, contact the ISI and at that point choose one of these DSA that is paired with the data. So we have a stick policy, a policy that follows the data, let's say forever, and these data are properly encrypted and stored in the bundle store. This bundle store can be implemented in various ways, could be also cloud-based, since the data are encrypted, and only the component of the frame of the corridor framework can decrypt them. At that point, another user, a consumer, who wants to perform an analytic, makes a query in the ISI to find the data that are relevant for this analytic. The ISI see which are the data relevant, enforce the data sharing agreement of all the data. Some of this data cannot be used for some reason, so will not be included among the data that will be exploited for the analytic. Other can be used as they can, as they are, so they will be included. Other can be used, but some of that kind of data manipulation operation must be executed before, so the ISI will execute this sanitization, let's say, of the data, and in the end prepare a virtual data lake where there are exactly the data that such user can see for performing such analytic in this moment, so under the condition of the framework and of the environment of this moment. Then the result is computed, is uploaded again back on the ISI with the proper DSA, and then the user will get this result. The user who asked for this analytic will get back this result. Okay, I think the next slide is visible. So, as you said before, the corridor is a distributed framework, so we want to deploy all these components on the stakeholder premises. Here we see that we have a number of stakeholders. Actually, we can even deploy partially the framework in the case in which maybe on the edge we don't have very powerful devices. We can, for instance, deploy only the ISI or some devices. The important thing is that all these ISI cooperate in such a way that they can exchange the data in such a way that each of them can get the data that are needed for computing the analytics that they are interested to compute. We have three pilots in our project. Stefano will describe in more details some of them. In particular, we have a pilot for information sharing and analysis center for multimodal transport, one for airport and integrated train transport, and the other for car sharing in smart cities. And this pilot has been chosen to be distinct possible application of the framework, considering also the coverage of the public and private sector. So, let's summarize a corridor. A corridor focuses on the data-centric usage control policies in such a way that the data producer can retain some control on the data they share. This would encourage them to share their data on our framework. This data-centric policy allows to express who can access, for which purpose, which analytic can be executed on such data, allows to perform some data manipulation operations such as anonymization function on the data before making this data available to for the computation. Also allow to express constraints on the set of data that are used in the same analysis, meaning then one of the things that a producer can express in his privacy preferences is that I don't want that my data will be used in an analytics with the data of a competitor, for instance, company. So there is also this concept of a group of data that are used in a single analytic. So it is a very powerful data-centric policy language. And finally, we can say that a corridor framework allows for data sovereignty for the European citizen. So the self-determination of individuals and also organizations about how and what data, how to control their data when they share to the others. So we provided a technology where we control ourselves what data and how data is used. And this sentence is taken from the State of Union Speech 2020 of Ursula von der Leyen. And with this, I conclude my presentation, and I think I give the floor to Stefano.
Thanks, Paolo. So there is some question, maybe?
Hi, Paolo. This is Pablo from Spain. I was checking this presentation, and I'm not sure this e-corridor is like system information even monitoring. And I want to know also about the license. It is events per second, gigabytes per day, something like the others. System information, even monitoring like ERCI, Splunk, or QRadar. What is this tool more likely?
About you mean the license for the exploitation of the tool? This is produced under the European project e-corridor. So we have a Apache-like license. That means that you can use you can freely use the tool as it is without any limitation on the hours or gigabytes, and that's it. So you can freely use it. The point is that when you want to use it in a specific environment, in a specific use case, now the corridor project customized the data sharing tool for the multimodal transportation system. So the policies, the policy language, and also the analytics that are now embedded in the current, let's say, release of the project are related to this. But actually, this data sharing tool environment framework is somehow agnostic with respect of the kind of data that we want to share and to operate on. The point is agnostic in the sense that we designed the project in such a way that with some, let's say, easy configuration files, you can easily customize all the framework for other scenario you may want to use. For instance, as I told you before, the collaborative analysis that you can integrate in the project actually are implemented as container with some REST-based services. We have defined a protocol, interaction protocol, and if you now develop your own analysis and you follow our protocol, so you take the data from the data lake that we provide you in the format we provide you, and you return us the result in the format that we want, we can easily, let's say, with the manual effort, so we don't need to redesign the architecture, but we can quite easily embed any collaborative analytics you may want. Also, for what concern the policy aspect, each scenario could have distinct requirement for what concerns the policy. So maybe there is a scenario in which it is relevant the physical position of the user who is trying to use the data. Maybe there are other scenarios in which is more relevant the role in the company of the user which is requesting the analytics. And then also these things can be accommodated because the policy, we have a vocabulary that can be extended with the terms that you want, both for expressing the feature of user data that you want to take into account in the policy, but also to host the new analytic we said before. So we can add easily also in the policy the new analytic to be able to write the policy allowing or denying people to use that analytic. And lastly, also for what concerns the data manipulation operation that are relevant for each scenario, obviously each scenario would have its own kind of data. Maybe there are scenarios where the kind of data we are interested in are videos, other scenario with images, other scenario with logs. And so obviously, with depending on this kind of data, you would like to define distinct data manipulation operation. Maybe in the photos you want to blur the background because you want to identify the person and you don't want to see what is, to show what is behind. Maybe in the video you want to know whether a person is always in this video or appear in more than one video. So, and then you want to focus on this person. So you can also customize the data manipulation operation, and again with the quite simple configuration operation that absolutely does not require to change the design of the framework. You can accommodate it for other scenarios. So in 3 words, the answer is yes, you can use freely our framework, but the effort that is required, if you want to use it in a scenario which is not exactly the multi-transport, the data sharing multi-transport systems, you need to perform some customization steps, which are actually easy for a programmer, obviously, to customize the framework for your specific scenario, for your specific problem. I hope this is what you would like to know.
And I had another question, because I'm working in a critical infrastructure network, managing the critical infrastructure network, and I want to monitor the network on the data of the network. So in case I use the advanced security services, can I use that to block some traffic, to block some ports? For instance, if I'm monitoring a network with routers and switches, and then I start receiving traps from the port 445, which is the one for the external route, for example, can I use this tool just to block that kind of traffic? Or
okay, yeah, here block the kind of traffic is a reaction. Actually, the tool as it is, although you can do it, this would require some additional work, because the tool as it is, what you would do is to take these network logs, elaborate them, and return a result. The result could be there is an intrusion, there is not an intrusion, and then what you need, as soon as you receive the result, is to really perform the execution of the countermeasure. Let's say that now is not the tool as it is does not enforce a countermeasure, the countermeasure you would like to enforce now, but it can be easily extended for doing this.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you to you. You're welcome.
So should I try, Guido, to take like 3 minutes just to briefly?
Yes, Stefano, thank you.
Okay, so trying to share my screen, a few seconds. Let me know when you see the screen.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
So as Paolo was mentioning before, there were 3 main pilots in the project, and here we like just to show you very quickly a couple of demos that we have done for one of the pilots, that is the airport and train pilots. So basically here what we see in this picture here is a classical multimodal travel, right? There are multiple touch points. You may take the car to reach maybe a car sharing, to reach the nearest railway station, and then reach the airport, right? That is in the major and the biggest hub maybe. Internally also the airport had multiple touch points that require different authentication and authorization for the passenger. So there is a need of re-authenticating passenger, sharing the data, sharing the information about what could be a delay on the flight, what should the passenger do in case of waiting time and so on. So in the project, we design a set of solutions to contribute to the improvement of the passenger experience and the operations for the transportation service provider. So we identified a set of solutions for performing seamless multimodal privacy-aware authentication. There are 2 main contributions. One is based on the multi-factor authentication with the large use of biometrics. You can see here, let's say, the classical face recognition approach. The e-corridor framework is also connected with the European Identity Management Solution, so the eIDAS framework, to ensure that the credentials of the passenger are verified in a pan-European context. There is a set of solutions for protecting the transportation service operator and analyzing the performance of the services that are offered. So you can see that here normal CCTV cameras can be used to analyze the hatches, the performance of the service hatches, for instance. How long is the queue in front of a bag drop desk? How many people are in a given area? Are they respecting the COVID-19 safe distance and so on? This information can be used to summon people. So there is kind of analysis and outcome for the transportation service operator. I can also get information about the position and how much time will take for the passenger to reach the next touch point, thanks to the information sharing of the corridor framework, as Paolo discussed. So we can have 2 operators, the train and the airport, that exchange information through the corridor framework. And we have a set of solutions that are targeting the passenger experience. So support a bring your own device paradigm to perform the mobile enrollment at home and to provide a privacy-aware preference matching for the services that are offered in the airport, like restaurant, shops, and so on. And then there is a set of information about the infrastructure itself that the airport or the train can share with the ISAC, that is another pilot in the project, to get intelligence and knowledge about potential vulnerability affecting the infrastructure. So as you can see, privacy is kind of critical here. So one of the 2 demos that I want to show you very, very briefly is the one that is based on the CCTV camera. So there are a lot of cameras that are already deployed and used by the transportation service provider. That could be the train station, could be the airport, and so on. There is an opportunity to collect information about the performance, so the satisfaction of the passenger while accessing to the service, and of course, having some kind of reaction. Currently, these solutions are kind of similar because each stakeholder that we have seen in the airport, because it's kind of big environment, big critical infrastructure, but it's the same when it connects to the train, they don't have a way of sharing the data in a privacy-preserving fashion, in a privacy-aware fashion. So there is this e-corridor framework that can enable that. And at the same time, when analyzing this camera that may contain sensitive information, it's important that the GDPR is respected. So let me now move to this quick video. I hope that you can see also my screen now. So basically, this first demo is about, let me skip quickly. So basically here, that is an example, right, of a normal train station. You can analyze, you can identify the area where you want to analyze the performance. This is a normal video, right? Passengers that are moving in the train station itself. We can extract some metrics here. Maybe I went too quick here, and here it's critical, right? What I want to point out. So the data manipulation operation that Paolo was mentioning before, so blurring the face, because basically if you want to analyze how many people are in front of a ticket vending machine, you don't need to know the face of the passenger, right? Just to want to know how many people are in front of the kiosk and how much time they are spending. So basically, the eCorridor framework provides these plugins that can be extended, can be build a new one to anonymize the passenger, the face of the passenger, while still keeping the analysis of the performance that you want to extract. Another scenario is when there is a passenger, the analytics in the eCorridor framework create the link, and in case the passenger goes far from the suitcase for a given amount of time, an alarm could be raised. Very, very quickly, so going here, another solution for the passenger authentication is based on the bring your own device solution. There is this connection of EIDAS that will allow to have verified credentials by member state, so credentials that are verified by a member state and then can be used, let's say, without incurring in any mistakes, voluntary or involuntary, in the information shared by the airlines, like the advanced passenger information. So we have a solutions here in the eCorridor project that basically is a mobile app that will allow the passenger to log in. Okay, there is the usual identification with photo, and here you basically can select information that you want to share with the transportation service operator. And that goes back to another point raised by Paolo with the self-sovereignty of the data, right? And with that, I will conclude to don't take more time. So back to you, if there should be any.
Thank you very much, Stefano and Paolo, for the presentation and the demos. I'm sure that if the participants want to go in depth, it will be easy to contact you and have more information. Thank you for the question that was raised before. Now we go maybe quickly to some of the questions that have been already collected. I ask you to answer maybe quickly in order that we can have the second speaker later on. So the first question is, which are the novelties of the eCorridor approach with respect to the state-of-the-art data sharing system? This is for Paolo, I imagine.
Yeah, okay, I can answer. So the corridor framework is a data sharing system, yes, but it has some novelties for what concern the policy, so what the expressiveness and what the policy allows to do. So first of all, maybe that in the presentation I did not spend too much time on this because okay, the time was 15 minutes, so I cannot say everything. But the first thing is that we have a continuous usage control instead of access control. This is a schema, a model that has been defined by Ravi Sandhu in the 2004, is I don't go wrong, but it's something, let's say, advanced with respect to traditional access control model like the ABAC, the AirBAC, because there is the concept of continuous usage control. The continuous means that when the data are in use, so maybe you select number, for instance, of videos from the airport because you want to know which is the average number of persons in front of the kiosk machine in a month, for instance. So this kind of analysis could take also a lot of time. The point is that the factors that allows the execution of an analysis when the analysis was requested, maybe that changes over time. In this case, what happened is that the result of the analysis cannot be returned anymore to the requester for some reason, because maybe that the factors changed, the requester has not anymore the right to have the result. So our framework is also able of doing this, so is able to understand whether during the execution of a long, let's say, lasting analysis, something changes, and if this change somehow affect the right of the requester to have back the result. Also, we have, I say this at the end, the possibility of expressing policies in the preferences of a data, of the data that you are sharing, but these preferences somehow involve the other data that will be used in the collaborative analytics, because the point of the collaborative analytics is that you select with the kind of query on the system all the data that you want. For instance, I go back to the previous example. I want the number of people in front of the vending machine of all the stations in Italy. Let's resume to want to do this, or on the day, I don't know, 10 March, 10 April 2023. So maybe that one of the companies providing these videos doesn't want that his data are used in the same group of data where there is the data of the competitor. So this can be easily expressed in the privacy preferences. So preferences that does not take only into account who is requesting the service, which is the analytic that is requested, but take also in account if these data are somehow, let's say, mixed with other data that are of competitor, or for some reason who produces the data doesn't want to make this mix, because combining this data maybe some additional information can be discovered, and I don't want this information to be discovered. Also, the data manipulation operation is a good novelty, because as we said, we can define this data manipulation operation, integrate in the framework, and put in the privacy preferences that we pair with our data, to force the execution of this operation before these data are made available for some analytics. So there is also fine-grained control in this case, because we can select for which analytic we want to perform this data manipulation operation, on which not. So this, I think that this high expressivity and configurability of the data usage control policy is the main, let's say, novel contribution of the e-corridor framework. So,
thank you. Second question, because the number of questions is growing, so please, if you can shorten your answer. Okay. If I can ask you, I understand that you are passionate and it's very interesting, but we have to stick to the time, please. So the second question is, which kind of data and which analytics function can be supported by the e-corridor framework?
Perfect. So I try to be brief. The corridor framework has been designed somehow to be agnostic with respect of the data and with respect of the analytics that it can support. So in general, the answer of this is any, provided that you configure the framework in the right way. The strength point here is that we designed the framework in such a way, doing this does not require change in the architecture, but only require, let's say, not trivial, but feasible configuration steps.
Perfect. So configuration, customization is also the point of the next question. Policy language used in e-corridor. Is it customizable for other use case?
Yeah. again, here the current release of the corridor framework is customized for the multimodal transportation, but we can extend with new feature, or we can also customize for other completely new and completely different use cases. Is a matter of customization. The strength is that the design has been taught to allow this.
Next question. In terms of automotive, could this framework use for adaptive driving assistance service, ADAS, like pedestrian detection, and could it be implemented in an embedded system?
Could be implemented in embedded system? Yes, we are working for this. Obviously, for this kind of application, which require to be very reactive, this depends on the power of the system. In general, the answer would be yes, because we could do that. In particular, I could observe that is not really this the aim of the framework, because the real aim of the framework is to try to collect data from several sources and then have a better result than computing this result only from one source of data. So, in general, let's say that if the network performances and the system performances would be big enough to allow to collect maybe data from several cars in this point, having maybe a very better view of the situation, so this would be a very interesting use case.
Thank you, Paolo. Last point. Thank you very much for your question, Ahmad. I like it very much because it's a way to open and to continue the discussion also outside this webinar. For research purposes, can the data be being shared, and how to contact you to do some partnership? If you allow me, Paolo and Stefano and eCorridor, then to share your email address or contact points in order that you can continue.
Yeah, for sure. The contact point is Fabio in this case, which is the coordinator. So I think that if you want to some partnership, the best thing is to send the email to him or to us, and we will forward to him. So please do as you prefer.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
No, thank you for this very interesting question. Thank you.
I don't think that there are any other questions, so I will give the floor now to Narges, if you can continue. And we have, Paolo, we have the email of Ahmad in the chat, so also this can be.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Narges.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentations. Hi, everybody. I'm Narges Mafeka. I work at Birmingham Centre for Rail Research and Education. We are the BRIC cluster, Birmingham Rail Innovation Cluster, and we also take part in different STARS projects. Today we have Mark Lodge with us. He is a researcher as well as a PhD student at the University of Birmingham, and he specializes in cybersecurity. Today he will be focusing on a procurement and rolling stock, and we will also be discussing some of the advanced technologies that are covered in our ERCI STARS projects. So Mark, please feel free to start, and the title of the presentation is Security Assessment of Onboard Ethernet Train Networks. Here you go.
Thank you, Narges. Hello, everyone. I'll try to share my screen first.
Yes, it's working.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Right. Hi, everyone. This is the agenda for my presentation, which I'll whiz through as quickly as I can and try and keep to roughly to the timings. I'll just mention a little bit about me very briefly, because it does affect the work that I've undertaken. I'll describe the research question to you that I've been looking at and the solution. I'll give you an example, and then I'll talk about what is planned for the future. Before I start, these are the STARS technologies involved in this work that Naja's mentioned. So the primary technology is obviously security, and that's in bold for that reason. The big data, cloud computing, connectivity and Internet of Things are also related to the modern train networks. They're not quite as obvious as security in the work that I've been doing, but if you can imagine the huge quantities of data that's collected on a modern train, diagnostics mainly, and that being sent off to wayside systems or into the cloud, that's why these other areas are relevant. But security is the main one. I've spent, as Naja's mentioned, I've spent almost an entire career in cybersecurity, not in academia, in various different places. And I was always a technical specialist in mainly penetration testing in the UK and some European work as well, and systems development, DevOps type work for secure systems in those sectors in order. So central government, I was in most of my time. And defence law enforcement, and then quite a large chunk in financial services. So I know those sectors quite well. Railways, I'm very new to the railways. I've been in this area for just over a year. So it's quite an interesting experience for me. Some things I'm quite, some aspects transfer nicely to the railways, but the railways are quite peculiar from an outsider. There are lots of things that are new to me. So I'm trying to apply my knowledge of other fields into this one particular field of the railways. It's quite beneficial in some ways because I've got a fresh view, but in other ways it's quite confusing because of the way that things are. I was given a research question by a train manufacturer, a rolling stock manufacturer, which I've shown there in red. So the manufacturer is very capable and very conscientious and is building trains that they believe to be secure as far as cybersecurity is concerned. But they've got a difficulty when they've actually built the train, and the difficulty is that they don't know how to independently assess the security of the train that they have produced. And then leading on from that, they don't know how to communicate that level of security to the buyer, to the person who owns the train, and to the company that operates the train. So they want to know how to assess the security and then how to communicate that to the owner and the operator. That feeds in indirectly to the owner and operator. It's the same question phrased differently. So the owner wants to know how to specify security requirements accurately for the train that they want to be built. And then they also want to know whether the manufacturer has met those requirements. And similarly, the operator who is responsible for the security of the train, they want to know whether the train that they are leasing or they are using is secure. And they want to know how they can demonstrate compliance with any laws or regulations that affect them. So that's the question that I've been trying to answer, those 2 points there in red. The solution to this is to devise a method of assessing a train, and these were the principles that I chose before starting out. So I could have just invented something completely new, for example, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to check first if there was anything that currently existed that could be taken and modified and used in this particular application. So the principles were any framework or assessment methodology produced needed to be usable by the manufacturers themselves, but also by the owners if they want to do this work, or the operators, or the regulators if they're involved of the rail network, and also any independent assessors who would perform this assessment on behalf of any of those four groups. It needs to be flexible to accommodate different train designs. the network design of a train is usually proprietary. So whatever assessment criteria is produced, it needs to be capable of being applied to network designs that we don't know about necessarily in advance. So it's got to be accommodating and flexible. Ideally, as I hinted at, it should, if possible, make use of mature or existing methodologies and frameworks and ways of working. There's no point in reinventing something completely new or inventing something new if there are mature systems and processes already out there that we could take and tailor specifically to rolling stock. I wanted to take advantage of good practice in other sectors, especially those that I would consider to be mature, and they are really defence, central government, certainly in the UK, and financial services, who've been doing this kind of work for beyond my career, so in excess of 20 years. I want it to make sure that the criteria removes or prevents any duplication of effort. So I don't want to invent something new that has to be done in addition to other assessments that might be required by regulators or regulations or laws. So the assessment procedure that has been suggested by me includes all other regulations. So you only need to perform the assessment once to give you compliance with any other regulations that exist in your country, in my case in the UK. And by performing this assessment, to continue that point, it gives you regulatory compliance as well as answering those research questions that I had from the manufacturer. So I spent quite a lot of time and thinking back to previous experiences, and I decided that the most sensible approach to this was to base the whole assessment on the EU NIS directive that was published in 2016. It's a security directive that applies to networks and information systems that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It became UK law in 2018, and it was renamed the NIS regulations. It's the same thing. It's the UK's representation of it. Now, when those NIS regulations became law in the UK, the National Cybersecurity Centre, which was quite new at the time, produced a cyber assessment framework, which organisations affected by the NIS regulations could use as the basis of an assessment of their infrastructure. So it didn't necessarily apply to the railways particularly, it applied to all sectors actually. And the UK Department for Transport took that and wrote some guidance about how this could be applied across the transport sector, so aviation, maritime, rail, road. Some parts of those transportation sectors adopted it quite quickly. Aviation was a lead player, and it's been quite interesting to look how aviation has sought to comply with the cyber assessment framework, which I call CAF. I know that might be confusing because there is a train manufacturer called CAF, but in the context of this presentation, CAF is the cyber assessment framework. So the way that this has manifested itself, which you can see in this stack is like a network stack that you might see if you're involved in communications in any way. So it's at the fundamental basis of this is the NIS directive and then the UK NIS regulations. On top of that, you've got the National Cybersecurity Centre's assessment framework, cyber assessment framework. And then the work that I've done is to take the generic cyber assessment framework and to make it into a train cyber assessment framework. The reason they're stacked on top of each other is because as a network stack, if you comply with the Birmingham Centre for Railway Research and Education train assessment framework, then that means you comply with everything below it. So just by passing this one assessment, you would comply with the lowest level, which would be the EU NIS directive. At the top on the top two layers, we've got the assessors and the operator. The assessor who performs the assessment using the train CAF, and then you've got the operator, the owner and the manufacturer who could work with the assessor. They could perform the work themselves while building or designing the train, for example. This is the actual process. Now, it's quite complicated. I don't want to go into the depths of it in this presentation, but the assessment framework that was produced to meet the NIST directive requirements, it involves, at the bottom of this diagram, it involves meeting 4 quite high-level objectives. Now, they've been dissolved into 14 principles, which have in turn been dissolved into 39 contributing outcomes. And above these, there are a whole set of indicators of good practice. So things that should be present in a train network that indicate that cybersecurity has been done properly. The assessment takes place by inspecting the train network to make sure that the indicators of good practice have been met. So it works at that level, the second level of this diagram. The assessor checks the indicators of good practice, and in turn that gives compliance, and it meets the objectives of the lower levels there in that diagram. The way that the assessment takes place is by a penetration test or a similar kind of work to a penetration test, more detailed than a vulnerability assessment. It requires expertise in networking and system security. So there are 2 aspects to it. The first aspect is a penetration test as you would normally accept. So there are no constraints, and the scope is the entire train network as it has been implemented. It would be performed as a penetration test is by accredited individuals using a methodology that will guide the assessors in their work, that is also included with this project. The methodology is given because the train network is slightly different to those systems and networks that penetration testers would usually see. It's quite, I'll show you in the next slide, it's quite an unusual architecture. And then the next point, that after the test has been completed, so it's a free penetration test, there's a practical assessment of each of those indicators of good practice. So the penetration testers work through the indicators and they decide whether they have been met or not as far as the security of the train is concerned. So the judgment or the evidence provided by the testers is the primary source of evidence. The secondary source, when that's not possible, is to interview the implementers of the train network. And then when that's been achieved, or if extra information is required, it's to speak to other members of the manufacturer's team or review the documentation that they've produced. So I'll give you a simple example, because that's quite, as I say, it's quite a difficult concept because there's so many aspects to it. So I thought I'd give you a couple of simple examples of how the network would actually be assessed. So this is, you might have seen something like this before if you're involved in train design or building or configuration or cybersecurity. This is a train, an example train network, hypothetical, that's been put together, not from one particular train, but from standards documents or manufacturers of train equipment. You can see that it's split into 4 for the 4 carriages, or 4 consists. There are 4 elements, and each element has 2 areas. There's a trusted zone and a standard zone. The points that I wanted to describe really, or for you to remember from this diagram, is that you can see there's a green, a blue, a purple, and a black network that runs in a linear fashion across the train. These are called train backbones, and they're backbones that transfer specific types of information. So the green and the blue, for example, in the trusted zone, they are the train control and management system network. So the braking, train brakes, acceleration, battery status, the train management computers, they sit on those 2 networks You can see on the left-hand side, TMC1 is train management computer. You can see some internal and external doors that are connected to this train network. This is Ethernet, actually, and IP based. You've then got two gateways, the red gateways that link upwards to a standard zone, so a less trusted zone. So on these networks, you find systems that have lower security and safety requirements. So the CCTV, public address systems, for example, and then crew Wi-Fi for use by the staff of the train, which can access train servers. And then there are cellular gateways that go off to the internet or to the operator or manufacturer's networks. So the bits I want you to just remember for the next slide are the concept of the backbone that runs down the train. And there are 4 backbones here. And then providing the backbone, those they're called ETBN, Ethernet Train Backbone Nodes. There are 4 boxes per backbone, and they're effectively routers that route the communications down the train. So this is what a train assessor would be looking at, and they would be determining whether this had been built securely or not, and if not, how it could be improved. So it's a fairly typical example of a standard Ethernet train network. So the first example, thinking back to those objectives and principles I mentioned, there is an objective within the framework, the assessment framework, called protecting against cyber attack. And that's got a number of principles that feed into it. One is identity and access control. Under that, there's an outcome of device management. So the manufacturer is trying to meet the objective, the principle, and the outcome by complying with these indicators of good practice, which are the 4 bullet points at the bottom. And it's these 4 bullet points that the assessor would use to determine whether the train has been built securely or not. So in some ways, the objectives and the principles they're quite high level, and they're not detailed enough for the assessors. So they're focusing on the indicators of good practice. So there are 4 examples. It's quite technical. Again, if you're familiar with these terms, then you will know them. But the first point says that the management of the routers is performed effectively using encrypted protocols using 2-factor authentication. Is that method used or not? There's flexibility deliberately in this framework, both from National Cybersecurity Centre and this train CAF, in that you might not manage your routers in that way. You might do it in a different way. That doesn't mean you don't comply with the assessment process. It's possible to write your own indicators of good practice if you do things securely, but you do them in a slightly different way. And there are a variety of different aspects there. So we've got password management, which would be assessed practically. So, for example, a penetration tester would inspect the configuration of the routers to make sure that the password policy is being enforced. They would physically assess, or they would port scan, for example, the routers to make sure that only these management secure and encrypted protocols are used to manage the routers. The last 2 points there are looking at how the backbones have been separated. So management traffic, for example, cannot be transferred between different backbones. It can't pass from low security to high security backbones, and that can be validated by penetration testing through routing tests or through inspecting rule sets on gateways and routers. As a second example, this is similar to the previous one and related to the diagram. This is looking at the outcome here is secure by design. So the networks need to be designed securely from the start to comply with the NIST regulations. So these are the 5 points that the assessor would be looking for as an example. Firstly, that the train network has been segmented into zones or backbones, which the diagram does show. with gateways separating the different zones. And then there are references to international standards that are relevant to train networks where appropriate, and pages and section numbers. In this case, IEC 62443, if any of you are aware of that. So the assessor would check practically, not relying on network diagrams, but they would practically check that this is actually a fact. And then as a second example, that the train control and management system backbone is physically or logically separated from all other non-critical backbones, which again would be assessed practically. There's a point there about passenger Wi-Fi, which should be physically separated from other backbones. And then finally, there's a part there about alerts, a requirement there about alerting when unauthorized traffic is detected. The idea, as I mentioned before, is that the train complies with all of these points unless there is a good reason that it doesn't, either because the network's been designed differently or the procedures are such that things are done in a different way. Once this work's been completed, the assessor or assessors will write submit a report which will show how the train complies with the train cyber assessment framework's indicators of good practice. So it will give evidence and for each aspect, and it will say how compliance has been achieved, or if it hasn't and why it hasn't, noting any deviations or mitigations if things have been done differently, as may well be the case. That will allow, working back up the stack that I showed at the beginning, that will allow the manufacturer to understand, and the owner to understand, whether those higher level NIST regulations, objectives, principles and outcomes have been met, and if they haven't, at which level they fail. So if a train is failing because a few contributing outcomes haven't been met, that's quite an easy aspect to correct. Whereas if there are lots of contributing outcomes that are causing failures of general principle, then there's more fundamental problems that need to be corrected. And it would produce the report would conclude with a list of recommendations about what needs to be done and to what extent. The work on this currently is at the point of writing the train assessment framework indicators of good practice. So taking the work that has been done in other sectors, in particular civil aviation, that's done some quite interesting work in this area, although they don't actually apply it to aircraft, they apply it to the infrastructure of civil aviation, but not actually the vehicles, whereas this is being applied specifically to trains, which is slightly different and I think possibly more ambitious, but it's a good time to do this. So to write those indicators of good practice and then to apply it to a train, which has been arranged for the next month or two. So to actually take a rail train that's being manufactured or just been manufactured and to apply the framework and to see how it meets, to see if it meets the NIST regulations or not, and how far away from those that it actually is. Once that's been done, I'll be able to modify the approach and possibly tweak the indicators of good practice if required. And then finally to publish the assessment framework, the train assessment framework, so that anybody else out there who wants to use it can, and then a paper that describes how it works and how it's been applied and what those results were. The future work after this, or certainly after the assessment of a train, is to try to get access to more trains. I know the train networks they're similar, but their Ethernet train networks are similar, but there are differences, and the more instances of this that I can see, the more realistic I can produce the list of assessment criteria. They will be more accurate with more variety, and I can update the assessment framework as my knowledge of train networks increases. I want to make sure that I include as much, I've done quite a lot of work in this area, but I want to include content from as many other standards as I can. So, for example, I mentioned the IEC 62443. If I can include compliance with other standards as part of the assessment framework, as I mentioned at the beginning, it gives a level of assurance that the train meets all required security requirements just by passing this one assessment. The UK Department for Transport actually did say fairly recently that to comply with the NIST regulations meant that you complied with all current UK rail security regulations, which is perfect, because that means by performing this one assessment, which is fairly comprehensive, but it means that you comply with everything else in one shot. Some further work down the line is to look at the qualifications of the actual individuals who perform this work, the penetration testers. There are some great qualifications in the UK, which the manufacturers are already using actually to select people to assess their trains. There's certainly scope to take those qualifications and to tweak them slightly, or to add a slightly different aspect to them to produce people that are actually capable and have the knowledge, specialist knowledge, to assess a rolling stock, to assess a train. It wouldn't be a massive amount of work for that to happen, because it's just an increment really to qualifications that already exist, and that would be brilliant because it would increase capacity and the capability of the individuals. It would also apply actually more broadly to different parts of transport. It's not just the railways, and generally industrial control systems, which a train effectively is. And that, I think that's everything. Does anyone have any questions?
Very much. That was very informative. Thank you. We're running a little bit short on time, but that's fine. I think we can go over the questions. Yes, I think we have a... Please go ahead.
Hi, Mark. This is Paolo. Currently, I am working in a railway network as a manager of the railway network. When I was attending to your presentation, you said that you have to isolate the different networks between the different backbones. This is something that is normally used using quality of services, because, for instance, in a train network, you use more bandwidth for the CCTV cameras, but it's not the most important traffic. So using quality of service, you can also separate these kind of networks and backbones. When you talking about that, you check.
Thank you for that. I really struggled to hear, actually. It was very crackly. Were you asking about quality of service on those different networks, or the need to separate them? That's the bit that I couldn't quite hear.
Sorry, it was my microphone. Yes, because you use quality of service because of the private security network. The most important traffic is the one that goes to the control center.
Yeah.
But this kind of traffic use less bandwidth than the CCTV cameras. So
sure. Yeah, the networks are actually the Ethernet train networking standard. The networks would all run at the same speed, and if it's Ethernet, it's capable of supporting those higher bandwidth requirements. So there's actually probably too much bandwidth for train control, or too much capacity. It's not really required. Whereas in those those backbones with lower security requirements, with components like CCTV, they can use the bandwidth, and there should be enough bandwidth for those services to work properly. The standard says 100 megabits a second for Ethernet train network, but the equipment will go much higher. It will run easily at 1 gigabit, if not 10.
Yes, and another question is, while you are doing your penetration test and you are checking if the gateways are separate between, then you check if it is configured in the network, in the routers and switches, some policies or access lists, like in Cisco?
Yeah, yes, that's right. Yeah, it's usually done in two different ways. So the first way would be to inspect the rule set or the configuration to check that it's been configured properly as far as the device itself is concerned. And then the other way would be to try to route traffic through the router, or to look at the router to check it's being configured properly. It doesn't have management services open, for example, or easy to guess passwords. And then to try and compromise devices that are allowed through the router. So you might not be able to route through from a laptop, for example, but if you can compromise one of the servers on the network, you might be able to route through the gateways using its IP address. That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes. So because we were running a bit short on time, Mark, I'm going to go through the questions that were posed, but if you could just briefly answer to each of them as brief as much as as short as you can, and then later on the they can actually, the attendees can ask you the questions by emailing you. So is a net so the first one is a net with a unique physical backbone and multiple VPNs more critical than a net with multiple physical backbones?
Is a network with unique physical backbone? Again, that depends how the train's been designed. So yeah, I think I mean, yes, some backbones are separate. Some do use VPNs or use different methods of separating the traffic. I'm not sure one is more critical than the other. It depends how that has been implemented as to how secure it is. So that would form part of that assessment. How is the data separated? Mm-hmm. So if you gain access to a lower security backbone or network, virtual network running over that backbone, what are the implications of that? How can you move from there into a more critical network?
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you. The next question is, why have you chosen to validate compliance by penetration testing rather than by a risk assessment or document review?
And the reason for that is through my career, the documentation, for example, that's produced for any system doesn't always bear any, it's not always accurate as far as the implementation is concerned. The only way really to determine whether it's accurate or not is to plug in a laptop and actually have a look.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, there is quite a lot of variance sometimes, and it's often because individuals change, or the team that writes the documentation isn't the same team as the team that implements the system, or things have to change to make things work and they're not reflected. So that's the answer to that. It's just to give an objective. That
makes sense. If the operator is responsible for cybersecurity, does the manufacturer need to comply with all the objectives and principles? All of them or some of them?
Yeah, that's under the assessment framework. I guess this is up to the owner. The owner could request that the manufacturer applies all the objectives and principles. Some are quite high level, so they apply to the organization itself, not just the train network. So the owner might say, for example, you as the manufacturer, we want to see how you comply with everything. How is information security dealt with generally? But they may require it to only be applied to the train, in which case certain aspects could be omitted and completed by the operator. So it's flexible, I guess, is the answer.
Thank you. And the next question is more practical. How can we find a cybersecurity specialist capable of assessing the train using the train cyber assessment frame?
They're actually out there already. As I mentioned, they don't have train specific knowledge or always industrial control system type knowledge, but they've got knowledge which is and qualifications which is reasonably close or close enough. I think there's scope for one additional qualification possibly, or some training that would get them to the point of being competent looking at a train.
Okay, thank you. Is the assessment performed once at the point of manufacture or more regularly during a train's lifetime?
The problem that I was given was manufacture, at the point of manufacture. Yeah, but I mean, yes, it could be done anytime, but I think manufacture is probably the main time, most useful.
And it's during the whole of the train's lifetime, or would it be just a few times?
If it was a bank now, just for example, it would probably be once a year. That would be dependent on the regulator, I guess, or the owner. A bank and a train, you know, they are different, but things change more quickly probably in a bank than they do on a train. But yeah, it could be done at any point. It's just what the appetite is.
Thank you very much. Just one more point that I saw in the comments. Somebody, I think, from the aerospace industry says that there are actually some related assessment needed for the civil aviation, including the plane, and not for the ATM infrastructure only. And his name is Stefano, who's happy to share some pointers with you.
Yes, okay, please, Stefano, that would be great. Yeah. I've been working with the UK Civil Aviation Authority, actually. And yeah, I do know they do things in the train. It was this type of assessment in an aircraft. It's this type of assessment that they don't. But if you've got some that maybe apply elsewhere, then I would be really interested to find out.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Luke, I'll
you.
Pass on the floor to you now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nages, for moderation. Thank you, Mark, for the interesting presentation. Or for sure, thank you also to Guido, Paolo, and Stefano for their interesting presentations and answers. So as the time is running, I have to invite you to answer our quick questionnaire to gather some feedback from this webinar, and also to gather some new ideas for new webinar topics in the near future. Guido is kindly put all the links that are following now into the chat. Then I have to announce the next events occurring with the STARS project. It's the STARS Hack and Match events. 2 events have been left to be produced in the STARS project. The next one is the 4th Hack and Match event on digital twin and artificial intelligence for railway products, services and processes. And it will be from 14th to 16th June. But small and medium-sized enterprises already have the chance to address their challenges in order to include these new technologies in their processes from now until the 21st of May. And there will be a link on this slide and also on the chat where you as an SME have the possibility to address your challenges. Then ERCI is supporting an B2B matchmaking event organized by the Eskişehir Chamber of Industry in cooperation with the Enterprise Europe Network. It's the Speed Match 2023 International Networking Event, and the registration is free of charge, and the sectors are covered are aviation, railway systems, and automotive supplier industry. In the STARS project, we have several webinars or tutorials. The first one should have taken place tomorrow, but it will be rescheduled due to some reasons to the 31st of May. That means today in 3 weeks. And the registration link is still the same. You can still register for this tutorial on sustainable development in railway business. Then we have some other topics on the 24th of May, also a Wednesday, using advanced optimization algorithms in transport and logistics. And we will have a tutorial series on the technical logical innovation analysis have been performed within the STARS project. This is the first tutorial on the topic of a sustainable and green rail system and green freight logistic chain. We have, for instance, one presenter from the EU Agency for Railway, Mr. Doppelbauer. He's the CEO of this agency, and he is part of this tutorial. And yeah, that will be on the 2nd of June, and we have another one on the 6th of June. It's on usage of advanced materials for the in the railway industry. Yeah, you are kindly invited to register. All these opportunities are free of charge, and yeah, and it would be good, and we would be appreciated if you take 2 minutes time to follow our feedback questionnaire. As I see, there are additional at least an additional question in the chat, but for sure it is recorded, and all the participants and all the presenters have the chance to type in a direct answer into the chat also after the webinar. And if it will not function, in any case, we will provide you with a link to the recording, the contact data of the presenters, and also the presentations. And so I guess that no question will be missed in the end. So thank you very much for this for attendance to this webinar, and see you soon, and have a nice day. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very